Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LocoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Laurin Conlon, owner of Team LocoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend, you know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com. All right, and we are back. This week, I'm with Rick, our mental health counselor.
Hi.
And today's podcast is going to be all about insecurities. And as a therapist, you see this as one of the most commonly brought up topics, right? Mm-hmm. Like with clients, or maybe they came to you for a different reason, but this is maybe the main driver of the other issues that they're having. So we wanted to cover this because it's something that, of course, I see with clients, with our team and other people I've worked with, and of course you too. So we're going to dive into some of the differences between men and women, because there are differences, but then also how to work through these insecurities so that they aren't affecting your entire life.
Yeah, absolutely. First, great intro.
Really?
You did it. That was your first really successful intro.
Wow.
You didn't mess it up. That was awesome.
Okay, well, we should just stop right here. You know what, guys? Don't stop being so insecure.
That's done.
The podcast.
It only took 150 episodes.
Fuck you. All right, let's start.
So how to make someone insecure.
Yeah, perfect.
Comment on everything they do wrong. So insecurity, definitely, it is a driving force in a lot of people's lives. It's a huge motivational factor, be it positive or negative, in a person's life. Particularly with the clients that I've seen or been seeing from working with you in the health and fitness related industry, insecurity is a pretty big thing, but it's common in every aspect of life, across all walks of life. It affects everybody who perceives themselves to be meek or mild, all the way through people who are considered to be bold and strong, people who consider themselves to be ugly, all the way to people who are beautiful. It doesn't matter where you are on that spectrum, you're going to deal with insecurity. And so it's a pretty common issue. Even if you're rich, poor people, you think people who are like struggling financially or who would consider themselves to be poor, you think they would feel more insecure than a rich person. But people who have considerable amounts of wealth have insecurities just in other areas of their life. And so I have yet to meet a person who is free and clear of insecurities. There's no such thing as a totally secure person. There's just varying degrees of where you are and in what topic or area we're really talking about. It just depends on what scope and scale we're looking at it and the lens through which you're looking. So, people can be insecure over a variety of reasons.
And I think what you said was perfect in the beginning, what they deem to be whatever, right? So you could think of yourself as somebody who's, let's just say, not attractive or not in shape, even though you are, right? Or you could think of yourself as somebody who is like, no, I'm in pretty good shape, like I'm pretty good to go here, but you have other insecurities, other places. So it doesn't, like every single person is going to deal with it, but how you view yourself in certain areas is going to be the most important thing. And, I can look at clients all day long and I can tell them all day long, like, you look great, you've been making great progress here, and like trying to be objective about it, not just like, hey, here's my subjective feelings about how you look and how you perform. Like, here's some objective measures. But it doesn't matter. When somebody is very, very insecure, they're still going to struggle with those issues, regardless of what anybody says.
Yes.
Even if they think that person, like whether it's you, me, anybody else who their opinion that they respect, it doesn't matter.
I've had this conversation countless times with clients, right? They'll be sitting there talking to me about an issue and I'll be like, okay, that's not the case. Like, you are smart, you are pretty, you are attractive, you are wealthy, you are a good person. You can say that over and over again, but the reality is what I'm doing is I'm telling them my opinion of them. And they haven't adopted the philosophy or internalized it within themselves. So it doesn't matter what people say. It doesn't matter how many friends you have, how many likes you get on a photograph. It all matters what you think and your perception of yourself. And so when we pay compliments to other people, they can be uplifting for the moment, but then it slowly dies down because it's not an intrinsic value that you maintain about yourself, which is where the insecurity comes from. And so what we're really talking about is a deep-rooted sense of inadequacy somewhere within the particular context of whatever it is that we're talking about. And so we want to understand that context, and then we want to understand maybe where that insecurity or that inadequacy is coming from or stemming from and why. And then we have a clearer path on how to address it, if they want to address it. Because a lot of people will use insecurities as crutches, as reasons to not move forward. So your motivating factors can be just as strong to not do something as they are to do something.
Almost like a self-sabotaging type thing?
It can be, or it can just be an inability to do anything. You know, like, I don't want to do this because I know what my fear is, and so by confronting it, it means I have to change. And so if I don't confront it, I can create all the thinking errors around it, and I can create all these cognitive distortions and defend against it, so that I can either keep myself as the victim, or that I don't have to change, or that I don't have to confront something. Because a lot of times people will come to me in pain, right? Same way to you, they may want to change their body or whatever, and they get to a certain point where like things are okay and they can handle it and it's more manageable, right? If the pain was at a 10, but we've dropped it to say a 5 or a 6, that's manageable. To take it from 5 or a 6 to a 2 or a 1 is a lot more work. And so that's when we begin to see a lot of resistance. So it just depends on what the person's motivation is for addressing it. And you can look at that positively or negatively, and how you perceive an insecurity can either be a positive motivating force in your life or a negative motivating force in your life. Before we move on, is there anything?
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that sometimes the defensiveness is, people don't even maybe realize that they're trying to be defensive about it until you bring it up, right? Because like you said, maybe we brought them down to like a 5 or a 6, and it's kind of like, all right, like things are pretty good, but like on our end, like we still want things to be better, because we know that for that person, we've seen other people in that situation, like, listen, like you can be better from here, but that work is so much more. And then it's like, no, I don't need to do that here. Like this is, I'm fine here. Like I don't need to change this. And here's all the reasons why. And you're like, well, this thing is still affecting everything else. And so, yeah, I would say that bringing that to light can be very uncomfortable. And I would say that you have to have a good relationship with that person first, because you can't just be like, hey, you're at a 10, let's get to a 2. Like, here's all of this. Like, no. We need to get to the 5 or 6 first. And then once you've built up that trust and you've built up that relationship, that's when you can say, all right, we've gotten to a really good place, but we can be much better. And here's how we can do this.
Yeah, and I tell my clients that all the time. I'm like, I don't rest on good enough. I wouldn't be doing my job. And if it was good enough, if it's good enough for you, you'll dip out of the session. You'll back off. You'll cut sessions back. You'll say, look, I'm in a good space. I'm in a good time. I don't need to keep moving forward. Like, okay, that's fine. If this is where you're at, it's fine. I'm not going to push you. But my clients who continue to come, it's kind of like, we'll hit a stalemate once in a while, or we'll get to a space that's really comfortable. And I'm like, this is usually when I pull out the goals again, and I'll reevaluate, and I'll say, hey, where are we at? Like, are we okay with our anxiety? Are we okay with our depression? Are we okay with this? Because if they're not, then it's like, okay, I need to make sure you're trending in the right direction, because I'm going to keep pushing you in different areas to do different things. Otherwise, what's the point in coming? We can be friends some other time, but you're paying me. So let's keep moving. So let's break down insecurities into like a couple of different categories so that it helps people understand. Number one, oftentimes we might feel insecure because we feel like we don't have the ability to complete a task. So when we don't feel like we understand something or know that we have the ability to do it because there's new skills or knowledge or something that's missing from it, we oftentimes will feel insecure. Number two, one of the reasons insecurity develops is because you think you're moving in the wrong direction. And when you're moving in the wrong direction, it reinforces decisions that we make. If you feel like you're already moving in the wrong space, the decisions you're starting to make can reinforce that idea. So if you feel like, all right, this isn't a direction that I want to go, you start seeking out information and making decisions to ensure that you go that way or don't go that way. Does that make sense? Or is that a little bit too far out there?
No.
Okay. And then another reason that people, develop insecurities or insecurities exist is because they're afraid to lose what they already have, which is a big deal. Insecurity, again, is one of the more powerful motivating forces. And so what I mean by that is, if you confront an insecurity, what you're doing is you're confronting something that is emotionally threatening. And so the natural human instinct, and I've talked about this on other podcasts, is a primary psychological response to stressful situations is you either move toward rewards or away from pain. And so it's kind of like this pleasure seeking or avoidance of pain. And so you have to ask yourself, what is motivating this insecurity? And how are you going to address it? Are you moving away from something, or are you moving toward the reward? And so it just depends on which perspective somebody's coming from.
Do you think that's the most common one?
The first two, number one, which would be your ability to complete a task, or avoidance of pain or pleasure seeking. That's a primary factor in all decisions. I mean, you take the way you take home because it's usually the quickest, which is avoiding pain. You dress the way you want to dress because it provides pleasure, or sometimes you're dressing a certain way because you want to avoid the pain that comes with that. You are going to make almost every single decision, if you break it down, like sit down and like think about not just big decisions, but just some of the more like mundane ones you make, and you're like, I'm not going to tell somebody something because I don't want to deal with their shit later. So I'm not going to say anything. That's avoidance of pain. I'm going to go do this, or I'm going to go gamble, or I'm going to go drink because it's fun. Now, drinking could be avoidance of pain as well. So you have to kind of look at it, from, it's the same question, but there can be different reasons for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, every decision we make on a psychological level, it can be funneled into one of those two categories. Like, find one that isn't and write it into us, like I'd like to see. And we could probably debate it. But if you find the one example, it doesn't really mean anything, because 99% of the examples that exist is for that.
Yeah, the competency one makes a lot of sense, and that I would say that that's probably one of the fastest ones to clear up, because obviously if somebody develops competency in an area, then they're like, all right, well, I'm no longer insecure. But the fact of, or the idea of like losing what you already have and like completely changing stuff is terrifying.
Yes.
So that's why I thought that'd be the most common one, because like once you go from 10 to 5, that's maybe like more of like a competency thing. Like you think, oh, okay, well if you've always told yourself like, I'm stupid, like I'm not smart, and then you decide, all right, well, I'm gonna go get a master's, like that, I don't know if I have the competency for this, but like let me try. And then you do it and you're like, all right, like that doesn't mean that now I'm smart, but I'm not as dumb as I maybe thought I was, right? I'm just using.
But you didn't lose anything in that process.
Example. Yeah, so that's like more of a competency building thing. But the complete like overhaul of people's lives,
yes,
I think is probably the hardest.
Yeah.
The biggest change.
That's where the insecurity determines whether or not you're going to move forward. The inability to accept change can keep people exactly where they are. It can propel people to move in odd directions that they never would have gone, or more than likely just stand still. That's usually what people will do when they're faced with that kind of pressure, is they stand still. And again, insecurities stem from a couple of different places. Anybody who experiences or has ever felt fear, and most importantly, feelings of not being good enough. Whenever you have a feeling of not being good enough, that's usually rooted in some level of insecurity. And anyone who's ever had hopes and dreams for the future is going to have insecurities, because you don't know everything about the future. It's uncertain. This is where anxiety is rooted. Anxiety isn't rooted in the past. It's rooted in the future. So whatever you're going to do is going to create anxiety, because you can't predict it, you can't control it, you have very little control over almost everything. The only thing you really can't control is yourself and your emotions and what you think. And so it's that level of the lack of control that can create insecurity within people, and that self-doubt. Am I good enough? Is this going to be okay? Are we going to be fine? Whatever the situation is, because you can't control those things.
And I know we always talk about social media, but it literally, I feel like, is one of the most important aspects. Like, I think it's made everybody's insecurities 100 times worse, because you're either seeing like the everything great that's going on in somebody's life, right? Or, and this is maybe like a different take, but you see other people's, like if they decide to share their struggles, right? And then you're like, oh, well, I'm not as bad off in this area as this person. So like, why am I struggling? Like, why am I so insecure? Like, now I'm this piece of shit. Like, this person has it way harder than me. Or like, I talk to a lot of people and they have this, like, oh, I don't want to share anything because like my feelings aren't valid because like this person has it harder than me in this other specific area where you don't really know everything else that's going on in this person's life. But in that one area, they're having it really hard and I have it easier. So like, wait, why am I even struggling here? And I just feel like both of those things have been so highlighted with social media because you're completely inundated with it at all times. And you're never not seeing that type of stuff. And you're never not seeing those messages because, I mean, everybody has social media and it's just pervasive everywhere. And people are generally sharing one of two things there. They're sharing the highlight reel, whether they want to or not. They're just sharing that kind of stuff. Or they're being very open about their struggles, which can then create other issues for other people. You know what I mean? So it's just one of these things. Of course, it's like all perception.
Yeah.
But especially with our clients, I mean, the idea of showing only what you want to show, especially when it comes to like what you look like, which obviously Instagram is very visual. So it's not even just what you look like, it's the car you drive, like the type of house that you're in, like the camera that you use, like did you edit it, like whatever.
Your filter.
All of that makes it so hard for people to want to feel good about anything, right? Because they're like, oh my gosh, like even if they know that person took that picture 3 months ago in perfect lighting with a tan and a professional photographer, they don't care. All they see is that moment. And that's what's stuck in their mind. And you can be a very rational person and still fall to these types of things. Like, I think anybody would be lying if they say like, no, I never look at this stuff and compare myself to other people. Like, of course you do. And that's okay. But you can't let that like completely ruin your life and drive these insecurities deeper, which then causes all these other problems, whether it's like with food or your relationships or whatever.
Well, the fact that if you're constantly seeking those things out, that speaks to the level of insecurity that exists within you. You know, to compare yourself to other people and hold yourself to an expectation of what everybody else around you is doing, it just shows that you're evaluating yourself based off of everybody else's goals and objectives and not your own, which is naturally going to make you insecure, because what you're doing doesn't really matter. It really matters what everybody else is doing and what everybody else's perception of you is. And so, you know, those things are traps most times. I used to run a group. One of the things I used to like to do with my group was I would have every person, it would be a group of like, say, 10 people. And I would say, all right, I want everybody to write down the top 5 problems you're having in your life right now, just the top 5. And, you know, people would create that list. It didn't have to be incredibly detailed. It was just whatever the top 5 problems are in your life. And then I would say, all right, now cross off 2 of them. And then cross off 1 more. I was like, all right, so we get down to the top problem in that person's life. And I would say, all right, now I want everybody to share what that problem is. And everybody would go around the room and they would be different problems. One person would be like, I'm too fat, I can't lose weight, I feel horrible about myself. Another person is like, I don't get to spend enough time with my family, I miss this, I've missed that, like this is my biggest problem. Another person's like, well, I have a horrible heart, like I have heart disease and this or that. And one guy's like, I have a shitty job. And like we just went around the room and I was like, who would you trade problems with, right? And everybody was like, I'll take that guy's problems, you know? And the one guy who's like, well, I make a ton of money. He's like, I make a 7-figure salary, but he's like, I don't have health. He's like, I'll gladly give you millions of dollars if you can get me in shape, if I can get these things back. And the guy who like doesn't have a great job, but has a wonderful family, like the other guy's like, dude, I'll trade jobs with you, but I want your time with the family. And so it's like, well, how do we rank these? Where does it fall? Where does it stop? And so you're always looking at somebody else's life through rose-colored glasses, and that's what social media does. It's just all 100% bullshit. It's just crap. Like whatever you're looking at on somebody else's Instagram is not their life. They know that it's not even their life. But that's just the image and the thing that they're projecting toward you. They have to.
And not even that it's fake. So I do want to make the distinction that there's clearly people who post things. Do you actively use social media, Rick? No. So fuck yourself. Anyways, it is real. Like you are sharing real things.
You can share real things.
Listen. So say you are posting a picture, right? Like you're not just going to take one picture and post it. Like the chances of that happening are incredibly rare, unless you're like the most photogenic person ever. Please give me some tips because I don't have them. So like there might be 15 of the same picture. Like say you did a photo shoot, right? And you're like in this one spot and you're taking pictures, and there's only one picture you're going to use because it's the same fucking picture. But the way it, like the angle was, or your smile was, or your eyes looked, or like whatever it was that you liked best. So it's not that it's fake. Like this is still like a picture of me. I know what you're saying. But so it's not that it's like people are posting fake things, but they're always still going to post the best one. Like I'm never going to be like, wow, out of these 15 pictures, I'm picking the fucking worst one and sharing that.
But even that one picture is not an accurate representation of what that person's life is like.
Oh, no.
And that's the point that I'm trying to make with it. Is it's just...
I know what you're trying to make, but...
It's not what... it's delivering... It's not delivering what is promised, you know, or what people actually think. You know, and so when we talk about insecurities are also most generally tied to core beliefs that a person will maintain about themselves. So... like I'll go through, I took a few from some of my clients that I work with. I'll get women who come in and they'll say, I'm not pretty. And so if we kind of use, there's a technique that we utilize in therapy, it's called laddering. it helps you identify what the core belief is. And by laddering, it just means we kind of drill down and we get to the idea of like what the person is saying up here and what they'll say in regular everyday conversation, how that reflects to their core belief. So the idea of saying, I'm not pretty. It's like, well, if this was true about you, what is that actually saying? It means that I'm not desirable. Okay, well, if that's true about you, what does that mean? And if I'm not desirable, that basically means I'm not lovable or I'm not worthy, right? And so if we look at common phrases that somebody who says I'm unlovable would be, it means I'm unattractive, I'm not worthy of love, that I don't matter, that I'm unwanted, I'm going to be rejected. So when I hear those phrases, immediately it starts to trigger or identify to me what that person's core belief is, because those are the things that they're going to say, but they're not going to come out and say that they're unlovable or that they're unworthy. Okay, for men, when they perceive themselves to be too skinny, right? So when I say, all right, well, if you're too skinny, what does that mean about you? It means that I'm weak. Okay, well, if you're weak, what does that mean? It means I'm helpless. And if I'm helpless, that means I'm powerless, that I can't achieve, that I'm a loser, that I'm out of control or I can't handle it. These are common phrases that associate that, and all of these things are related to deep-rooted feelings of inadequacy and insecurity within that person. When a person feels worthless, they basically still say things like, I have no sense of worth or value. They feel inferior, they feel wrong all the time, they feel insignificant, right? So when we're looking at all these things, it's kind of like, well, where does this all start? Because insecurities are oftentimes a learned behavior. It's not something that is innate within you. And when I'm speaking about that, I mean the general population, assuming that we grew up in a relatively healthy environment, in a relatively stable environment. And so one of the things that I try and get people to understand is your insecurity can actually be traced back to either events in your life or experiences in your life. At some point, you felt or behaved in a very confident, fearless way. Most of the times we can see this with kids, right? Take them to a beach and they just want to run into the water even though they don't know how to swim. Like they're unaware of the dangers. So one of the questions that I will have for people, and I'll kind of go down this rabbit hole with them, is I'll be like, who taught you to be insecure? Who taught you to doubt yourself? And so I'll say things like, who taught you to doubt yourself? What taught you to question yourself? Who or what told you weren't good enough, or strong enough, or smart enough, or pretty enough, or funny enough, or worthy enough? And usually one of those questions, it's like you'll trigger something and the person will start to talk about a relationship. Sorry, mom and dads, it usually comes back to you. Our parents are the most important relationships in our lives, and so at some point our insecurities are rooted in that. I don't always want to blame the parents though, because when you think about what taught you to be insecure, it's kind of like, well, what was going on in your life at that time? Did we have overly critical parents? That can be one issue. Were you maybe living off government assistance, right? That can make you insecure even as an adult. Were there people in your class or your neighborhood, did they make fun of you because you were different or weird? Did you realize, and this is one that a lot of people will struggle with sometimes, is did you realize that your value only existed in certain moments in life? Basically meaning like you only have significance when you're in the classroom because you're the smartest person, or when you're on the court because you're the best, right? And when you no longer exist or have any meaning or value outside of your talent, that can make a person feel very insecure. So there's a lot of different ways that these things can manifest, and that's how we start to see it play out in a therapeutic environment.
Yeah, and then of course, I think it's important too, not just like the people, but thinking, like you said, to the event, because sometimes it might just be not like a person or person. It could have just been like, wow, this one thing like completely changed me. And I think people forget about that sometimes. I don't know, it's such like a hard line, especially with parenting, because there's like part of it's like, oh, like you're like you're worthy, you can do whatever you want, this, that, whatever. But then also like teaching kids to be like self-sustaining and like hardworking, and not just like, yeah, you can do whatever you want, but like without any kind of follow-up. You know what I mean? And not this to turn into a whole parenting podcast, because clearly I'm not a parent, but I could see how that can be challenging, especially if somebody was told their whole life too, like you're the best, you're the greatest, and then you get into the real world and you realize like, oh, I'm not the best, I'm not the greatest, because there's all these other millions of people who are doing what I'm doing, and they're doing it better because of whatever reasons, right? Yeah. So it's kind of like that like reality hit too for some people, probably when they do hit a certain age, and they do go to either like college where they graduate or they start their first job or whatever it is, and then they're like, oh, I was told that I was super special and like everything was so great. Yeah. And then you're like, oh, and like that kind of like fall from reality, right? Like it's almost like that first time that you learn about like, I don't know, like malevolence in the world. Like you think everything's so great, everything's so like whatever, and then you actually learn about like real bad things. Unless like obviously if it happened to you, that's one thing. But say it didn't happen to you and you had a pretty like, you know, like normal life. Mm-hmm. Nothing overtly traumatic happened to you, but you like learn about these other things and you're like, wow, like there are like actually bad people. When I was just thought everything was so great all the time. Mm-hmm. People are nice and everybody treats me well and all. So I feel like there's that too. Which I don't know what that would be titled, but like growing up a certain way and then like realizing one day, like whether it's like because you're now in the real world or like whatever, that like, oh, I'm not what I thought I was. And it doesn't mean that now you're worthless. It just means that other people have other resources and they've been doing this for longer. Mm-hmm. But I think that without that kind of like prep for some people, that can be really
and so how you're exposed to challenging situations can determine and can greatly impact your ability to manage situations that are fearful, manage situations that are anxiety producing, to take on new challenges and risks. So there's a fine line between boosting your kid and developing a healthy sense of self-esteem versus like not crippling them with an inflated ego and thinking that there's this huge sense of entitlement without hard work. And so that's where we begin to see, you know, some issues, particularly in younger generations. Like older generations seem to have a little bit better grasp on that because things have just changed culturally. We don't raise our kids the same way they used to be raised. Like we're really overprotective in a lot of different ways. You know, I mean, when you stop keeping score in like baseball games and when you give ribbons and trophies to every single kid and everything is equal, and it's like that all the way through high school. It's like, well, now the kids has to get a job.
And college, depending on
and now all of a sudden they don't get what they want. And it's like, well, everybody else did, why shouldn't I? And it's like, well, we didn't prepare you for that. There was no, you know, there's no competition anymore. Everybody expects to be even. It's like, no, that's not the way it goes. So you see a lot of adjustment issues later in life with people who are struggling with some of those issues. And they feel insecure about themselves because they don't know how to make their way through the world. But, you know, one of the things that I do want to talk about is that insecurity, self-doubt, these are learned lessons in life that essentially get reinforced through your own beliefs and perception of yourself. And I use the example with a lot of my clients of a tape recorder. Earlier in life, your mind is a blank tape. But the people in your life, whoever they are, parents, friends, siblings, whatever, that community of people, they write the earliest messages on that tape recorder. But it's not them that plays it back, it's you. And so you keep playing these things over and over in your mind, and sooner or later you adopt everybody else's beliefs about you, and they become your beliefs. And it's, you know, you might be dealing with like a 37-year-old client, and I'm like, yeah, when did you think that about yourself? Who thought those things about you? Like, isn't it time to erase this tape and maybe write some of our own messages on it? And usually they're like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I hate hating myself all the time.
That's why I'm here.
So what I do want to say is when you make the decision to confront an insecurity, what you're really doing now is you're challenging yourself. But you're also putting yourself in harm's way, emotional harm. But what you are doing is you're attempting to retrain your brain and your mind and to learn something new, which is a good thing. Because in order to confront and overcome an insecurity, you have to be willing to confront it. Otherwise, you're going to take the path of least resistance and avoid doing it. Now, whatever that insecurity is, on whatever level in your life, how that affects you, it's up to you to determine whether or not you want to live with that pain or do you want to confront it and move forward. So some things and some skills that will kind of help people in this space. Number one, you need to start asking yourself some really kind of guided questions so that you can identify where your strengths and weaknesses really lie in this process. So, number one, how do you respond to things that make you frightened? Are you good at handling fear? Can you identify times in your life when you confronted fear or something that was terrifying to you, and what was the outcome? You know, did you walk away? Did you shift courses? Did you do something completely different? Did you confront it and overcome it? And now you realize, hey, if I did it once, I can do it again. Now we're going to see more competency in tasks, or it's like, if people have done this earlier in their life or at some point in their life, it's like, all right, well, I did it once, I know I can do it again. And so there's a little bit more there's less apprehension, I should say, in taking on new challenges because they know they've already successfully done something. Fear is a constant in your life, and it's more or less learning what to do in the face of that fear. So if there's something that makes you afraid, that's normal. That's a big part of life. It's just how you react in that space when you are afraid is going to determine your future, your outcomes. Like, what is your life going to look like? Is it going to stay in the same space? Is it going to grow? Is it going to evolve? Is it going to deteriorate? That's up to you. Number two would be how do your thoughts and your feelings impact what you do? So physical appearance, like sometimes, a lot of our clients, they're really working on their bodies because they want to look better. But looking better oftentimes can be a substitute for the emotional insecurity that exists within themselves, right? And so what people will realize is like, wow, I've got ripped abs and awesome arms and great legs and a body that is to kill for.
But I still hate myself.
But I don't feel happy.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, we were working the wrong muscles here. And so it's not to say that, get out of the gym, no, like be healthy. If you enjoy the process, enjoy it. But understanding what are our motivating factors for getting into it. And so if you were like, an overweight kid, and you decided to get into the gym to get into shape so that everybody else around you accepted you, right? You're still pretty insecure. And you haven't really addressed what the core issue is, which is self-love and learning how to accept yourself. So understanding that process is important.
Yeah, especially with I would say that diving into something like physically, whether it's the physical competition side of things, right? So just if you want to, okay, I'm going to challenge myself to do a bodybuilding show, or I'm going to do, I don't know, a powerlifting, whatever it is, right? Like some kind of athletic event. Obviously less so with performance-based sports, and definitely more on the physique sport side is where we see a lot of these issues. But it can still,
Agreed,
it can
100%.
still be the same thing, whether it's weightlifting, CrossFit, powerlifting, whatever you're still doing. It could still be another kind of outlet, or running, right? Like marathon running. Anyways, but we see it a lot more on the physique side because obviously the end goal is a physique that most people think, until they get there, is desirable. And that's why we try and talk so much about that, because it's not talked about enough. And it's not that competing is bad for that reason, but when you're doing it for the reason that I'm insecure, I don't like my body, everything in my life is a mess, let me do a bodybuilding show. That is not going to fix anything, and it usually makes it 100 times worse.
Yes.
Because I've yet to meet somebody who is stage lean, truly stage lean, who is functioning as a better person. Now, you can certainly get to a certain level of leanness and be fine, but dipping into actual competitive staged leanness is a very different ballgame. And we always try to just prep people about this. This is not a bucket list thing. If you want to be competitive, do it. If you want to challenge yourself, do it. If it's because you're I want to get in shape for my 40th birthday, or I finally want abs and I want to stop hating myself. No. Whoa. We are not doing this, because you're going to be so much worse off, and whatever insecurity is actually there is going to grow tenfold.
Yeah.
But then the glimmer of excitement and that dopamine rush that you got from competing, you think, oh, competing's the answer. But it's not. It's just because you did something exciting and fun, and everybody was like, oh my God, you look so crazy. How'd you do this? Tell me all about it. And then guess what happens? 2 weeks later, those people don't give a fuck or care. And then you're back to oh, well, this insecurity is still gnawing at me. Let me do another show. And that's why we try to talk so much about that, not because it's anything against competing, but it's just the reality of the situation. And if you're not ready to address that, you're going to have a lot of problems.
And what you just said is the perfect segue into the second or the third point, which is your level of self-worth. So how much of your confidence comes from internal sources versus external sources, right? So if you're looking, which all too often happens, we look outside ourselves for validation. And what I mean by that is we're turning to our friends, our family, our peers, our colleagues, competition judges to say you're great, to say you're the best. People will start Instagram accounts so they can build up their following so that they get 1,000 likes on everything that they do, because that's the validation they're looking for from outside sources. It's not coming from within you. And so when we constantly look for outside sources, we devalue our perception of ourselves and who we are. Your internal resources are the sources that say what you think, what you feel about yourself. And so your worth as a person is not tied to the perception of another human being. But all too often we give other people that power. And everybody's guilty of it, myself included. I'm not above this at times in my life, but you have to, the benefit I think, at least in certain moments that I have with this, is I'm at least painfully aware of it. And so I'm like, okay, shit, I need to pull it back. Like when I hear myself thinking the things that I'm saying to my clients or clients are saying to me, it's like, and that's just because I see it in everyday conversation, but I'm still guilty of doing it. And so I have to reel that back within myself and remember, like, what are my priorities and where am I? And this isn't right. And so you have to make those adjustments along the way for yourself.
Yeah, I never want people to hear what we're saying and think that we don't deal with these things, because we certainly do. Everything that I've ever talked about or you've ever talked about, we still deal with on a daily basis, obviously at a different scale.
Sure.
And I think that is what is important to talking about it, and not saying it in a way of like, oh, here's just all these struggles, but it's like, all right, here are like real things that happen to real people and literally everybody, but here are skills to manage and cope with it, to actually not just feel defeated and actually be able to get above that.
Yeah, I mean, even in areas of your life, if you challenge yourself in certain ways, you can re-experience insecurity. Like I spent my whole life, like growing up, I used to do boxing and kickboxing, and I was really good at it. And I felt really confident at it. And then when I moved to Florida, I was like, I really want to try jiu-jitsu. And for those of you that don't know, kickboxing and boxing is just stand-up striking. And jiu-jitsu is ground fighting, where there's no striking and it's basically like a modified wrestling match, and you're making the other person say uncle. Like they have to tap out to get you off of them. And so here I was really confident because I'd been on the mat for 25 years of my life. I was like, this is nothing new to me. But I walked in a familiar environment, but a different experience, and I got my ass kicked. Like it got cleaned, and I was humbled, and I felt insecure walking in the second time. I'm like, do I really want to go back? I was like, yeah, I do, because I really want to learn that. I want to make other people feel bad. But there's a perfect example of an area in my life where I felt really secure, very adequate. And then by kind of walking into a space where I knew I wasn't in control anymore, it put me in a very vulnerable space. And it was like, all right, this is an opportunity for me to pleasure seek and move toward it, or avoid the pain and walk away from it. I'm unfortunately a glutton for punishment, so I went back and I've continued to do it. But that's a perfect example of you can challenge yourself in certain ways, but the first few times a person walks into a gym who's never worked out, like that can be one of the most intimidating environments you've ever been. The gym culture, there's like this, everybody knows what they're doing, the different machines, the different exercises, the different weights, different programs, the workouts, the routines, the language, everything about it is different. Well, imagine if you're, 50 pounds overweight and now you're walking in there and like, you can't do anything. Even worse, in my opinion, is if you're the guy in that situation who like has to pick up the 5-pound dumbbell because he can't do anything else. And you're looking at, dudes who are, 70-pound dumbbells and they're just throwing weight around and you're like, oh, this sucks. Or the woman who like just can barely get on the treadmill and work her way through it. But those are the people that are confronting their insecurities. Like they worked up the courage to walk into that gym, to be around all these fit people who are quietly judging them usually, and they're still doing it.
I'm really mad because most people don't judge people at the gym.
You're really mad at people who judge?
No, I've said I'm really mad because most people don't judge other people at the gym. Of course people do, but I'm trying to see the good in people.
We hope
all
not.
Right?
But I give those people a lot of credit because they're in there and they're doing it. And that's exactly what it looks like to say, look, I've put myself in a position to be in harm's way emotionally, and I'm going to continue to try it, because the only way to stop being overweight is to like manage your diet and start exercising. Like that's it. And so they're doing it, and you eventually see those people continue and they look great, a couple years down the road, and that's awesome. Number 4, what's your work ethic like? When we're talking about working out, like this is it. If you had to ask yourself, if your work ethic was the sole factor in determining whether or not you were a success, is that something you would really bet on? Like, so ask yourself.
Me?
No, I'm just using it as in general. I will not ever ask you a question on the spot again.
I am not confronting this today. I'm just going to leave.
I reference you guys back to podcast number 1 with us.
No.
What was it? What is psychotherapy?
I don't know.
That's what it was. I think it was.
I don't think it was.
Like episode 33, maybe 34, somewhere in there. Go back. You can listen to Laurin fall apart.
Violently fall apart.
But go to the YouTube version of it. So you see her sweat and perspire and like physically turn red. It's pretty awesome. But your work ethic. Are you working hard enough to accomplish the goals that you want? If that was the only factor, let's pretend all other situational factors are gone. But if that's the only factor standing between you and the goal, are you willing to bet that you worked hard enough? If you're not willing to take that bet, then there's an area that you can woefully improve. Number 5, are you around people who are supporting your dreams? If you're going to be around people who are going to bring you down, it's really hard to build self-confidence. So you have to be aware of the people in the environment that you're in. Because other people's insecurities will impact your life. They will project those insecurities onto you. Everything that they're saying that you're going to do is the reality is that's what they're feeling and that's what they're going to do, more likely if they were in that situation. And so that projection can be very crippling to people, and it can be a huge roadblock to whether or not you can overcome certain obstacles. So it's super important to find people who are going to support that. Whether that's coaches, whether that's friends or peers, and maybe that means you evaluate the people that are in your life or who you tell about these things. We've talked about it before. There's certain people you're just not going to talk about preparing for a competition with because they're not going to get it and they're not going to be supportive and they're going to judge the hell out of it, and so they're super critical. That's likely to start bringing people down and make them doubt themselves and think, am I going in the wrong direction, right? This is where it all starts to come full circle. And so whatever somebody's telling you, you can't do or they can't do, it's usually something that's, feeding from their own level of insecurity. So you have to be very careful about who's around you and keeping the right people who are supportive of your dreams and your goals and want you to be a more confident person. Number 6, do your boundaries enforce your goals or your non-negotiables? If you encounter somebody that says, hey, you're not going to be able to do, go ahead, did you have a question?
No.
You like paused. If you have boundaries,
just breathing, that's fine.
To enforce your goal, and your non-negotiables is just basically like, is this something that is, if this is a deal breaker, am I willing to continue to make concessions for that? Or am I going to back out of it? Because if I'm going to back out of it, if I'm not going to enforce my boundaries with this particular goal, with this objective in mind, how likely is it that it's going to work? And when you attempt to do something and you fail at it, there's 2 responses generally that people have. Like they'll learn from it and they'll grow, or they'll completely shut down and they won't try it again. And then the last one, and this is probably one of the more important ones, is how are your past experiences impacting you today? So are you still seeing the world through your traumatized eyes? Are you that same hurt little girl? Are you that same hurt little boy? And you're now 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, whatever, but you're still seeing the world through that lens. If you haven't questioned that, if you haven't realized that you are a different person now, you're going to be stuck there. And that's unfortunately where a lot of people stay stuck, is they stay stuck in that like traumatized moment in their life when people told them they weren't good enough. And it's that switch between like discrediting what that person was saying and learning to believe in themselves enough to recognize the value internally within themselves.
Yeah, I would say that getting over that for sure has to be the hardest thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can change a lot of the other stuff, but whatever happened before, like you often weren't in control of that, whether it was a person or a situation. So that feels so much harder to get through,
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine. But that has to be probably the most impactful. Like once you can, that's like the 5 to 2 level, right? Like once
Mm-hmm.
you can do there, you're like, all right, once I get past that and whatever you said, the rewriting of the tape.
Yeah,
I don't want to mess up the analogy.
Tape.
Okay, that thing. Because I'm so good with analogies. That's like when you're going from 5 to 2 and now you're finally like, all right, I'm over this. Or maybe not over it, but you're probably still going to have, I do want to touch on that. Like, I think that oftentimes people think that they've had an insecurity in the past and just because it like pops up means that like something is wrong, right? So I have a lot of clients who have either gone to therapy or they've done a really good job on their own of like kind of working through these things, or like we worked through them, right? And it's really, really awesome. But every once in a while people will get a like flicker of their old kind of thought pattern and they're like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, no, like did you act on it? Did you do anything negative around it that you would have before? No, you just had that thought. Like, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it would be fair to say like you should be completely rid of these like insecure thoughts that you used to have. It's better to say, all right, I might still have those thoughts, but all right, I had the thought, I sat with it, I realized that it wasn't true, I recognize this, I didn't act on it, and I moved forward. People always say like once you're an alcoholic or once you're a smoker, like you're always going to look at those things. It doesn't mean that you're like this lesser than person because you look at a cigarette and you're like, man, I really like that. But did you have it or did you not have it, right? Same thing with food. So a lot of people, of course, clients that I work with struggle a lot with food and their behaviors in relationship with food. And just because you have that flicker of that thought, like, oh, I should purge right now. Or like, oh, I saw this and I really want to overeat this. It's, you had that thought and then you sat with it and you moved forward and you didn't do this. You didn't go and exercise for another 2 hours because that's what you normally would have done. You said, all right, I recognize this is an irrational behavior and I move forward. So having that thought isn't necessarily the problem. Obviously when the thoughts are recurring and they're like constant and then eventually you act on them, that's when the problems are. But I think that if somebody's gone through something that's like very, very, like a big insecurity of theirs, like again, relationship with food, I don't think it's wrong to have those thoughts. I just want people to recognize that acting on them is really what's the most important.
You're 100% right. It's totally normal and it's typical. And that's with any behavior or something you're willing to change about yourself. Like you're going to have moments and doubts where old things just creep back into your mind. It's just your ability to manage it in that situation and like categorize it. And it's the self-talk that you tell yourself like, nope, this isn't it. Like stop that thought, replace that thought, that kind of stuff. And you get through it. So, remind yourself that, insecurities can give you direction in life. And, we've talked about stress perception in the past. An insecurity oftentimes to me as a therapist is a gold mine because it's a direction for us to be moving. And so you can either look at your insecurity as a gift and say, look, this is an opportunity for me to grow, an opportunity for me to challenge myself and to push myself to become better. Or you're not going to bring it up to me and you're going to go in the other direction, or you're not going to take the steps that you need, and insecurities will be a motivating factor for you not to change, for you to stay exactly where you are. And how you're thinking about your insecurity will be reinforced through your behavior. When we think something is a negative experience in our life, it's followed by negative thoughts. We associate negative feelings with it, and our behaviors oftentimes are negative toward it. Whether we don't participate, we don't put our effort in, whatever it is. If something is positive, we think positively about it. We draw negative or positive emotions toward it, and our behaviors are usually reflective of accomplishing that task. So your perception of that insecurity and flipping it in your mind and saying like, look, this isn't something I need to be ashamed of. This is something I want to challenge myself with. Like an example could be like if you're insecure about your ability to protect somebody or your ability to perform in a fight, right? And you've never taken any type of training before. It's like, okay, I have a choice. I can either not do anything, or I can suck up the humiliation and walk into a jiu-jitsu school and start taking classes. And sooner or later, your competency level will rise. You'll be able to complete that task. You'll know because you can catch people. You'll know what to do in those situations, and the insecurity goes away. Does that mean you're going to step into a ring at the UFC? Probably not. But can you handle yourself in the event that some idiot tries to hurt you or hurt somebody that you love? Absolutely. So you just got to deal with that. And one thing I do want to leave people with is the idea if you don't address your insecurities, you will forever pay the cost of having them. And so those insecurities exist not for various reasons, because you can't control, your mom or your neighborhood that you grew up in or some of the other stuff, but you can control yourself now. But what happened then is controlling you, and you're paying the cost for it now by your inability to move forward. So
that was the perfect place to end.
Cool.
So I hope this was really insightful for you guys. If you want to reach out to Rick for consulting, I will put his email in the show notes so you guys can have that. If you want to check out any of other podcasts or articles that we've written or apply for coaching, you can go to teamlocofit.com, and we will see you guys next week.